The Sunnah is divided in two ways in order to answer the question of whether every saying, act, and approval of the Prophet, peace be upon him, has the same status for purposes of acting upon it as a source of law. The first division is based on how the legal rules are communicated. It is also called the division of the Sunnah according to its nature. This type of the Sunnah is divided further into three subtypes: Sunnah based on the sayings of the Prophet, peace be upon him; Sunnah based on the acts of the Prophet, peace be upon him; and Sunnah based on the tacit approvals given by the Prophet, peace be upon him. Some jurists have discussed another subtype called Sunnat Tark, or Sunnah of intentional omissions. Sunnah Qawliyyah is defined as the sayings of the Prophet, peace be upon him, through which he intended the laying down of the law or the explanation of the rules. Generally, the word hadith is used for this type of sunnah, insofar as the word hadith means saying. In this sense, the word hadith has a meaning narrower than that of the sunnah. Some of the specialists, however, use the term hadith to mean all that is reported from the Prophet, peace be upon him, that is, words, acts, and approvals. In this sense, the words sunnah and hadith are synonyms. It is in this meaning that al-Bukhari calls his book al-Sahih min al-Hadith, when his book contains all three types. There are a large number of sayings of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that are considered as Sunnah Qawliyyah. Some well-known examples are: entitlement to revenue depends on a corresponding liability for loss. The nature of acts is dependent upon the underlying intentions. No injury is to be caused, and none is to be borne. And intentional murder leads to retaliation. It is to be noted that not every saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him, is a source of law. This is obvious from the definition stated. To become a source of law, the purpose of the saying should be the laying down the law or its elaboration. Sunnah Fi'liyyah is defined as the acts of the Prophet, peace be upon him, having a legal content, like his prayer, fasts, and Hajj. These acts, or the method of their performance that he adopted, are to be followed in the same way as his sayings. The acts that do not have a legal content do not become a source of law. This may be understood by distinguishing between the following types of acts. First, ordinary physical acts performed by every human being, like eating, drinking, walking, and sitting. Such acts are not meant to lay down laws, though some jurists consider them to be permissible acts. This becomes clear when such acts are compared with acts that lay down the law. Jurists maintain that an act of the Prophet, peace be upon him, pertaining to law indicates absolute or unqualified permission, which includes obligation, recommendation, and permissibility, till such time that another evidence fixes the meaning for one of these. This means that if no other evidence is available, the acts of the Prophet, peace be upon him, will be interpreted to mean permissibility. As compared to this, the ordinary acts mentioned, like eating and drinking, indicate permissibility initially. They do not indicate recommendation or obligation. In addition to this, there may be acts that pertain to his experience as a human being, like the organizing of the army, war tactics, trading skills, and so on. These acts, too, do not become precedents of law because their basis is skill and experience rather than revelation. Some jurists say that accepting evidence for proving facts in a trial or case cannot be considered as binding either. The reason is that they treat this as a skill. On the other hand, they would consider a decision rendered in a case as a binding precedent. He is reported to have said, "I am a human like you. When you come to me as litigants, some of you have better evidence than the others, and I decide according to what I hear. Thus, if I have given to one something that was due to the other, I have given him a piece of hellfire." Second are acts that are specific to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the rest of the community is not to follow him in such acts. For example, in the case of the number of his marriages, which is based on a law specific to him. Third are acts that are intended to be explanations of unelaborated rules in the text. All such explanations have the status of law. The persuasive force of such explanations is the same as that of the text being elaborated. The explanation of an unelaborated word will take the force of the unelaborated word on which it is based. The acts of his prayer after his saying, "Pray as you see me praying," as well as his acts concerning the rites of Hajj based on his saying, "Take the knowledge of your rights from me," are examples. Fourth are acts that establish new laws. These acts obviously have the force of law. It is to be noted that some jurists divide the Sunnah Fi'liyyah into acts and intentional omissions. And this leads to a further subtype called Sunnat Tark. This type means omission or abstention from an act by the Prophet, peace be upon him, which indicates that the act he has given up is not permitted. The Prophet's omission of the act indicates that giving up the act is better than its performance. An example is the Prophet's refusal to become a witness for a person who had given most of his wealth to one child. The omission here indicates that the act is not legal. It covers both disapproval and prohibition, and the jurists have differed in determining one of these according to the evidences they have relied upon. It may sometimes become obvious that the omission is not because of disapproval, but due to some other reason, like a natural aversion to a thing. The Prophet, peace be upon him, refused to eat a fat-tailed lizard and then explained that he did not feel like having such food. As it was something personal to him, it means that it is not prohibited to eat such things. Again, the omission may be for fear that the act may be construed as an obligation, when the act itself is required by law. Examples are the avoiding of Tarawih prayer during Ramadan on certain occasions, as well as his saying, "If I did not foresee hardship for my community, I would have ordered them to use the savak for brushing of teeth before each prayer." Tacit approval is defined as the commission of certain acts, by word or deed, by some companions and the maintenance of silence by the Prophet, peace be upon him, without expressing disapproval. His silence in such a case is called takrir or tacit approval and is considered a sunnah that becomes a source for the permissibility of an act or a statement. An example would be the practice of different types of partnership practiced before him without a disapproval from him.